I just want to be held. I don't even care if it's at gunpoint, honestly, no shit.
On November 29th, 2024, Fort Lauderdale police responded to what they initially thought was a routine welfare check. A family had discovered their loved one dead in his apartment after he'd been missing for several days. But what officers found at the scene would reveal one of the most calculated and disturbing murders in recent Florida history. The victim was 46-year-old Jason Bloomfield, a reliable Burger King employee who had never missed a day of work without calling. His body had been decomposing for nearly a week while someone continued to live in the same apartment, going about their daily routine as if nothing had happened. That someone was a 37-year-old woman who had spent years perfecting the art of deception, posting religious messages on social media while harboring a criminal past that would soon catch up with her. For 6 days after committing murder, she went to work, talked to neighbors, and even drove the victim's car around town, all while his corpse rotted away just feet from where she slept each night. November 29th, 2024, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A 15-year-old boy and his grandmother approach an apartment door, their hearts heavy with worry. They haven't heard from their loved one in days, which is completely out of character for him. They knock, no answer. They call out his name, silence. Finally, they use their key to enter. The smell hits them first. Anyone who's ever encountered death knows that odor, sweet, sickening, absolutely unforgettable. But they probably don't recognize it immediately. Maybe they think something spoiled in the refrigerator. Then they find him, Jason Bloomfield's body, decomposed after 5 days in Florida's heat and humidity. Imagine being that teenage boy, walking into a room and discovering your father's corpse in advanced stages of decay. Imagine the scream that tore from his throat. Imagine his grandmother trying to shield him while fumbling for her phone to call 911. This wasn't just the discovery of a body. This was the moment a family's world collapsed forever. But here's what makes this story even more chilling. While Jason's son and mother were making this horrific discovery, the woman responsible was probably thinking she'd gotten away with the perfect murder. She had no idea her carefully constructed lies were about to unravel in the most spectacular way possible. Let me take you back to the beginning, to who Jason Bloomfield really was before his life was stolen from him. Jason was just an ordinary guy living an ordinary life in Fort Lauderdale. At 46 years old, he wasn't asking for much from the world. He had his job at Burger King, where he showed up every single day without fail. His co-workers could count on him. His manager knew he'd be there when scheduled. In a world where reliability is rare, Jason was that one employee every boss dreams about having. Jason was also a passionate Miami Dolphins fan. Win or lose, he supported his team with the kind of loyalty that only true fans understand. It was one of those simple pleasures that brought joy to his life, even when times got tough. But the most important thing in Jason's world was his family. He had a 15-year-old son who meant everything to him, and he maintained a close relationship with his mother. They were the kind of tight-knit family that checked on each other regularly. When Jason didn't show up somewhere, or didn't answer his phone, people noticed immediately. Jason shared an apartment with his girlfriend, 37-year-old Veanitta Lenon. From the outside, they seemed like any other couple trying to make it work in today's economy. Sure, they had their problems. Money was tight, and they were facing eviction from their Fort Lauderdale apartment. But these seemed like ordinary struggles that millions of couples face every day. Nothing that appeared worth killing over. But appearances can be deadly deceiving, and Veanitta Lenon was not the woman she pretended to be. Veanitta had been born in Detroit, Michigan, but had moved to Florida years earlier. She'd lived in both Miami-Dade and Broward counties, bouncing around like someone always running from something. At just 4 feet 11 inches tall, she might have looked harmless to most people who met her. But looks, as we're about to see, can be fatally misleading. What should have been a massive red flag to everyone around her was Veanitta's criminal record. She wasn't some first-time offender who'd made a youthful mistake. She was what prosecutors would later describe as a career criminal, someone who had made breaking the law a way of life. Her rap sheet told the story of a woman who believed rules didn't apply to her, who had spent years perfecting the art of deception and manipulation. But if you scrolled through Veanitta's Facebook page, you'd see an entirely different person. She posted regularly about God, work, family, and living peacefully. She shared inspirational quotes and talked about letting divine providence handle her problems. To anyone browsing her posts, she appeared to be a woman of faith trying to turn her life around, seeking redemption and spiritual guidance. The reality couldn't have been more different. Behind those religious posts was someone struggling with serious problems that were about to explode into violence. Money was the biggest issue weighing on both Jason and Veanitta. They weren't just tight on cash, they were facing eviction, about to lose their home. The stress of potential homelessness was crushing both of them, but it seemed to affect Veanitta in a particularly dark way. When people are desperate about money, they sometimes make desperate choices, but most people don't choose murder. Their relationship was also deteriorating. According to stories Veanitta would later tell people, Jason was cheating on her with his ex-girlfriend, whom she described as problematic and troublesome. She made it sound like this betrayal was the final straw that broke their relationship apart. But here's the thing. Investigators would later discover that this entire story about infidelity was just another one of Veanitta's elaborate lies. The truth was that Jason and Veanitta were still living together as a couple when he died. They hadn't broken up. They were just two people, under incredible financial pressure, trying to figure out how to keep a roof over their heads. While Jason was probably thinking about picking up extra shifts at Burger King or finding a cheaper place to live, Veanitta's mind had wandered to much darker possibilities. Her criminal past had taught her that conventional rules didn't apply to her. Those Facebook posts about Satan getting busy weren't random spiritual thoughts. They were the mindset of someone who was already planning something evil, someone who was preparing to let the darkest parts of her nature take control. November 23rd, 2024, started like any other day for Jason Bloomfield. He had no way of knowing it would be his last day on Earth. He couldn't have imagined that the woman he trusted, the woman he shared a bed with every night, was about to end his life in the most brutal way possible. That evening, around dinner time, neighbors in their apartment complex heard something that would haunt them forever. 6 gunshots rang out from Jason and Veanitta's unit. 6 loud bangs that shattered the quiet of what should have been an ordinary Thursday night. Those neighbors had no idea they had just heard Jason Bloomfield's final moments, and they definitely didn't know that his killer was already planning her next move. Think about what 6 gunshots means. This wasn't someone who panicked and fired once in a moment of fear or anger. This wasn't a struggle where a gun went off accidentally. This was deliberate, calculated execution. Veanitta had emptied her weapon into Jason, making absolutely certain he was dead. Each pull of the trigger was a conscious choice to end another human being's life. The next morning, November 24th, something unprecedented happened at the Burger King where Jason worked. For the first time in anyone's memory, Jason Bloomfield didn't show up for his scheduled shift. His manager stared at the schedule, then at the clock. Jason was supposed to be there. He was always there. In all the time he'd worked at the restaurant, Jason had never been a no-show without explanation. He was the kind of employee managers dream about. Reliable, responsible, professional. If Jason couldn't make it to work, he called ahead. He gave notice. He was considerate of his co-workers and respectful of his commitments. But not today. Today there was just silence where Jason's voice should have been. The manager tried calling Jason's phone. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again an hour later. Still nothing. As the hours passed and Jason's shift went uncovered, concern began turning into genuine worry. This behavior was so completely out of character that everyone who knew Jason understood something was seriously wrong. Meanwhile, Jason's family was experiencing their own growing panic. His mother tried reaching him throughout the day with no response. His son called and texted repeatedly, each unanswered message adding to their anxiety. For a man who stayed in regular contact with his loved ones, this silence was deafening and terrifying. But while everyone else was worried sick about Jason's safety, Veanitta Lenon was busy spinning an intricate web of lies designed to cover up what she had done. When neighbors asked about the gunshots they'd heard the night before, Veanitta had her story ready. She told them with a completely straight face that a friend of hers had fired those shots somewhere nearby. Just some random incident that had absolutely nothing to do with her or Jason. She seemed calm about it, almost casual, as if discussing the weather. Her performance was so convincing that none of them suspected she was lying through her teeth. When Jason's family called the apartment looking for him, Veanitta's story changed completely. She told them that she and Jason had broken up. According to her version of events, Jason had been cheating on her with his problematic ex-girlfriend, and she'd finally had enough of his betrayal. She made it sound like Jason had simply walked out of her life, choosing his ex over their relationship. The family was hurt and confused, but they had no reason to doubt her explanation. What none of them knew was that Jason was still in that apartment. He'd never left. He couldn't leave. His body was hidden in a small bedroom, and with each passing day the evidence of what Veanitta had done was becoming more difficult to conceal. The apartment that Jason and Veanitta shared became eerily quiet after the murder. Neighbors who were accustomed to hearing the normal sounds of daily life, television shows, conversations, footsteps, now heard nothing at all. It was as if the place had transformed into a tomb, which in a very real sense it had. But here's what makes Veanitta's behavior after the murder so chilling. She didn't just kill Jason and panic. She didn't immediately run away or turn herself in. Instead, she began what can only be described as the most cold-blooded cover-up imaginable. After shooting Jason 6 times in the living room, probably while he was just sitting there relaxing, maybe watching television or eating dinner, Veanitta dragged his body into the small bedroom. Picture this scene for a moment. A woman barely 5 feet tall dragging a grown man's dead weight across an apartment floor, the blood trail she left behind, the physical effort required, the complete emotional detachment necessary to grab your boyfriend's corpse and move it like a piece of furniture. But she wasn't finished. Veanitta then grabbed cleaning supplies, Clorox bleach, rags and a mop, and began scrubbing away Jason's blood. Imagine her on her hands and knees, methodically cleaning up evidence of her crime. The smell of bleach mixing with the smell of death. The calculated way she worked to erase every trace of what she'd done. Cleaning up blood isn't as easy as it appears in movies and television shows. Blood seeps into cracks, soaks into wood, leaves microscopic traces that forensic investigators can detect even when you think you've eliminated everything. Veanitta would learn this lesson the hard way when detectives eventually processed the crime scene. After she finished cleaning, Veanitta moved a couch to block the bedroom door where Jason's body was concealed. This wasn't the action of someone in a panic. This was careful planning, creating a barrier so that if anyone came to the apartment, they wouldn't accidentally discover what she'd done. Then came the part that truly reveals the depths of Veanitta's calculated evil. For the next 5 days, she went about her life as if nothing had happened. She went to work, she ran errands, she talked to neighbors, she even drove around in Jason's car, using his vehicle while his corpse rotted away in their shared bedroom. Most disturbing of all were the posts she made on Facebook during this time. While Jason's body was decomposing in the next room, Veanitta was writing about God and Satan, about letting divine justice handle things on her behalf. She was literally living with the evidence of her own evil, while posting inspirational messages about faith and righteousness. Think about the psychological makeup required for this kind of behavior. Most people who commit crimes of passion experience some level of guilt, panic, or remorse. They might try to cover up their actions, but they're usually consumed with fear about being caught. Veanitta displayed none of these normal human reactions. She was sleeping, eating, and living normally, just feet away from her victim's decomposing remains. The cell phone and GPS evidence that investigators later obtained painted a horrifying picture of those 5 days. The data showed that Veanitta was at the apartment when Jason was murdered. Not nearby, visiting a friend, not somewhere else entirely. She was right there when those 6 shots were fired. But that wasn't even the most shocking discovery. Detectives learned that after Jason was dead, Veanitta had been using his phone to access his bank account. She made multiple Zelle transfers, systematically draining his money, while his family frantically tried to reach him. Think about how cold and calculating this was. Your boyfriend is lying dead in the next room, and you're stealing his money. The transfers happened over several days, showing that she was methodically robbing Jason even as his body was decomposing. While Jason's family was sending desperate text messages asking where he was, worried sick about his safety, Veanitta was reading those messages. She was watching his mother's panic. She was seeing his son's desperate attempts to contact his father, and she did absolutely nothing. She allowed them to suffer for 5 days, knowing exactly where Jason was and exactly what had happened to him. Days passed with Jason's absence from work continuing and his family's calls going unanswered. His friends started asking questions. Everyone who knew Jason understood that something was terribly wrong. But Veanitta kept up her performance, telling different stories to different people, always with a ready explanation for why Jason wasn't available to speak for himself. By November 29th, Jason's family couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. His 15-year-old son and his mother decided to go to the apartment and check on him personally. They'd been calling and texting and worrying themselves sick. Jason would never just disappear like this without explanation. They knew something was wrong and they were determined to find out what had happened to their loved one. Picture this moment from their perspective. A teenage boy and his grandmother walking up to an apartment door, probably arguing about who should knock first. They were worried, maybe even scared, but they had no idea they were about to walk into a nightmare that would traumatize them for the rest of their lives. They knocked on the door. No answer. They called out Jason's name. Still nothing. Finally, they used their key to enter the apartment. The smell hit them immediately. That sweet, sickening odor of death that once experienced is never forgotten. But they probably didn't recognize it at first. Maybe they thought something had spoiled in the refrigerator, or there was a plumbing problem. Then they found him. Jason's body was in the small bedroom, already in advanced stages of decomposition. For 5 days in Florida's heat and humidity, his remains had been rotting away while his killer went about her daily routine. Imagine being that 15-year-old boy walking into a room expecting to find your father and instead discovering his corpse bloated and decaying beyond recognition. The 911 call that came in that day was probably one of the most heartbreaking emergency operators had ever received. A family member finding their loved one dead is tragic under any circumstances, but finding them like this, after days of wondering where they were and why they weren't answering their phone, creates a kind of trauma that changes people forever. Within minutes of that call, police cars and ambulances were racing toward the Fort Lauderdale apartment. Crime scene investigators were summoned. The medical examiner was notified. What had started as a missing person case was now officially a homicide investigation. But here's where the story takes an even more twisted turn. Just as police were securing the crime scene and trying to process what they were seeing, something incredible happened. Veanitta Lenon showed up at the apartment complex, driving Jason's silver BMW. Think about the audacity of this moment. She was driving her dead boyfriend's car to the scene where his body had just been discovered. The level of arrogance and miscalculation is breathtaking. Did she really think she could show up and continue her performance? Did she believe her lies were so convincing that even faced with a homicide investigation, she could maintain her innocence? What happened next revealed just how shallow Veanitta's deception really was. As soon as she saw the police cars and ambulances, she immediately started crying. Not just crying, wailing, making a huge emotional scene about how devastated she was to learn about Jason's death. But here's the detail that exposed her completely. The police officer who watched her performance wrote something very specific in his report. He noted that Veanitta was fake crying with no actual tears. She was making all the sounds of someone who was heartbroken, going through all the motions of grief, but her eyes were completely dry. This wasn't genuine emotion. This was acting. And it was terrible acting at that. Real grief doesn't look like a theatrical performance. Real tears don't turn on and off like a faucet. The officer's trained eye caught what family members might have missed in their own shock and trauma. While Veanitta was busy with her fake crying routine, detectives were already starting to piece together what had really happened. They spoke with neighbors who had heard those 6 gunshots on November 23rd. They talked to Jason's manager at Burger King, who confirmed he'd never shown up for work after that date. Most importantly, they started examining Veanitta's various stories, and those stories were falling apart faster than she could tell them. Remember how she'd told neighbors that a friend had fired those gunshots somewhere nearby? Detectives checked police records. There were no reports of gunshots in the area that night, except from this specific apartment complex. No calls about random shooting incidents. Her story was complete fiction from beginning to end. Then there was the story she told Jason's family about them breaking up because he was allegedly cheating. But if they'd broken up, why was she still living in the apartment? Why was she driving his car? Why hadn't anyone else heard about this supposed breakup? Why were there no signs that Jason had packed up his belongings and moved out? The detectives weren't buying any of it. They'd investigated enough crime scenes to recognize when someone was lying. And Veanitta's lies were so obvious they were almost insulting to their intelligence. As they processed the scene, more damning evidence started accumulating. Jason's body had clearly been moved after death. He hadn't died in that small bedroom where his family found him. Blood spatter patterns in the living room told the real story. He'd been shot multiple times while sitting in the main area of the apartment, probably completely unaware of what was about to happen. There were obvious signs that someone had attempted to clean up blood evidence. Investigators found traces of bleach and cleaning products, along with drag marks across the floor, showing the path the body had taken from the living room to the bedroom. The couch that had been moved to block the bedroom door was another clear indication of calculated concealment. This was far from a crime of passion, or a moment of panic. Someone had killed Jason, moved his body, tried to erase the evidence, and then continued living in the apartment for 5 days while his corpse decomposed. And that someone was standing right in front of them, fake crying without shedding a single real tear. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Veanitta's deception and callousness. Cell phone records and GPS data placed her at the apartment at the exact time the murder occurred. There was no question about her presence when Jason died, but the digital evidence revealed something even more disturbing. After Jason was killed, Veanitta had systematically used his phone to steal his money. She'd accessed his bank account and made multiple Zelle transfers over the course of several days, while his family was desperately trying to reach him, while his co-workers were wondering why he'd missed work. While everyone who cared about Jason was sick with worry, she was robbing him blind. The crime scene reconstruction painted a picture of cold-blooded execution followed by calculated cover-up. Jason had been shot 6 times in the living room, probably while he was relaxing after work, completely unsuspecting. Veanitta had then dragged his body to the bedroom, cleaned up the blood evidence as best she could, and blocked the door to prevent accidental discovery. For 5 days, she'd maintained her normal routine. She'd gone to work, talked to neighbors, driven Jason's car around town. She'd posted religious messages on Facebook about letting God handle things while literally living with evidence of her own evil. She'd stolen Jason's money, lied to his family, and let them suffer through days of agonizing uncertainty. Every aspect of her behavior after the murder demonstrated a level of calculation and callousness that's truly disturbing. This wasn't someone who killed in a moment of passion and then panicked. This was someone who committed murder and then methodically executed a plan to avoid consequences, no matter how much additional suffering it caused to innocent people. The case against Veanitta Lenon was overwhelming. Every lie had been exposed. Every attempt to cover up her crime had failed. The physical evidence, the digital evidence, the witness statements, and her own contradictory stories all pointed to one inescapable conclusion: she had murdered Jason Bloomfield in cold blood. It took months for the legal system to catch up with her. But on May 2nd, 2025, justice finally arrived. A patrol officer in Fort Lauderdale recognized Veanitta from the arrest warrant and took her into custody. After months of thinking she'd gotten away with murder, her freedom was over. When prosecutors examined Veanitta's criminal history, they saw a pattern that extended far beyond this single murder. On May 5th, they filed what's called a career criminal felony case against her. This wasn't just about Jason's death anymore. This was about a woman who had made crime her lifestyle, and the justice system was finally ready to hold her accountable for everything. The charges were severe and appropriate: murder with a firearm for Jason's death, and fraudulent use of a deceased person's personal information for stealing his money after killing him. That second charge represented the ultimate insult added to the ultimate injury. On May 28th, Veanitta stood before a judge for her arraignment. This was her opportunity to admit what she'd done, to show some remorse for destroying Jason's family and ending an innocent man's life. Instead, she pleaded not guilty to all charges. Even with overwhelming evidence against her, even with her lies completely exposed, even with no credible defense for her actions, Veanitta was still trying to manipulate the system. She was still pretending to be the victim, instead of acknowledging herself as the killer. The judge wasn't impressed by her continued deception. Bond was denied, meaning Veanitta would remain locked up at the Paul Reen detention facility in Pompano Beach, while awaiting trial. As of now, she's still there, still claiming innocence, still refusing to take responsibility for the cold-blooded murder of Jason Bloomfield. This case teaches us several important lessons that could potentially save lives. Veanitta's criminal history should have been a major warning sign to everyone around her. She wasn't someone who'd made a single mistake years ago and learnt from it. She was a career criminal with a pattern of breaking the law and manipulating others. The financial stress that Jason and Veanitta were experiencing, facing eviction, struggling with money, created a pressure cooker situation that brought out the worst in someone who was already predisposed to criminal behavior. When desperate people with criminal histories feel cornered, they can become extremely dangerous. The neighbors who heard those 6 gunshots should have called 911 immediately, instead of accepting Veanitta's explanation about a friend firing shots nearby. In today's world, we cannot afford to ignore sounds like that. When you hear what might be gunshots, especially multiple shots fired rapidly, call the police and let them determine if it's worth investigating. Jason's co-workers and family did everything right. They noticed when he disappeared from his normal routine and took action quickly. But imagine if someone had recognized the warning signs earlier. What if people had been more aware of how desperate Veanitta was getting about money? What if someone had questioned her constantly changing stories? We all need to be more observant of the people around us. Financial desperation combined with criminal history, constant lying, and social media posts that don't match reality. These are all signs that someone might be dangerous to those closest to them. Jason Bloomfield should still be alive today. He should be cheering for the Miami Dolphins, working his shifts at Burger King, and spending time with his teenage son. Instead, He's gone because the woman he trusted decided his life was worth less than her convenience and her money problems. This case shows us that evil can hide behind religious posts and fake tears. It demonstrates how financial stress can turn deadly when it encounters the wrong person. Most importantly, it reminds us that we all have a responsibility to watch out for each other and speak up when we see warning signs. Jason's 15-year-old son will carry the trauma of discovering his father's decomposed body for the rest of his life. His grandmother will never forget that smell, that sight, that moment when their world fell apart forever. Veanitta Lenon didn't just kill Jason. She destroyed an entire family's sense of safety and trust in the world. But we can honor Jason's memory by learning from this tragedy. We can be more aware, more willing to speak up, and more ready to help when we see the signs that someone might be in danger. Because staying informed about these cases isn't just about understanding crime, it's about protecting ourselves and the people we love from predators who are still hidden among us, pretending to be something they're not.